All right, well, we're still talking about this period of great transition and upheaval in the early 20th century. And I want to talk about what's going on in Russia. Okay? Just a little bit about Russia, their involvement in the war. Remember, when the war begins, the Russians are really involved, right? I mean, when Franz Ferdinand is assassinated, it's the Russians who begin mobilizing their troops, which is seen as an aggressive act by the Germans especially, Austrians too. And that's what prompts the declaration of war. All right? And the Russians were heavily involved in World War I. The ruler of Russia at the time was this guy here on the left. His name is Nicholas, Tsar Nicholas II. Your name is Nicholas? Oh, your name is Tsar. No. Well, we can call you Tsar. The Tsar, if you like me. Just Tsar. As long as we don't call you Bazaar, because that means something different. That's like a marketplace in the Middle East. But yeah, he's the Tsar. You know, the word Tsar, you brought up the word Tsar. I'm glad you did, because the word Tsar is actually related, I think I told you in here, to the word Caesar. It comes from the word Caesar. So the word Caesar that you have in the Roman period becomes the word Kaiser, like Kaiser Wilhelm comes from Caesar, and so does Tsar. Tsar comes from the sort of Russified. That's not a word. But anyway, that's the way they sort of adapt this idea of the word Caesar. Well, he is the leader at the time, and here is his lovely wife, Alexandria. He has a lot of controversy, all right? I think that's the easiest way to put this. A lot of controversy. And this is what's going to prompt or lead to eventually an overthrow. But a big part of it's not only the controversy, say, with him and his wife, but also over the war. Because the Russians go all into this war. And they lose lots of troops. For example, in just 2 years roughly, 2.5, they lose 2 million. 2 million soldiers die, and 4 to 6 million are captured or wounded. And remember what we've said. I believe we've said it in here before. If not, we'll say it again, or we'll say it for the first time. When you were wounded in World War I, it often led to your death. If it didn't lead to your death, it usually led you to be permanently disabled. I mean, real big problem. For example, you just lose your leg, you lose your arm, things like that. Things that are hard, you can't do rehab or something. I mean, and of course at the time they didn't have the technology that we do. And so when a lot of these guys are coming back, they're in bad shape if they're wounded. Some of them are barely alive. The other thing, they had a lot of infection. Didn't have the kind of antibiotics we have today, and a sort of triage, a sort of, fly the guy out of the battle scene and take him to a real nice hospital. That kind of stuff wasn't happening. And so this meant, if you add that up, that's 6 to 8 million Russian men killed, captured, or wounded, and probably severely wounded. That's a huge number in 2.5 years. And so many people in Russia began to think, you know what? We don't want to be in this war. Remember, everybody pretty much thought, I shouldn't say everybody, but most people believed that this war would be quick, that this war would be over quickly, and it would have minimal losses, and we could get maximum gains. That was the idea. For example, Russia would gain access to those territories of the Ottomans down in the Balkan states, perhaps gain some territory in Eastern Europe, and that would happen in 6 months, a year. Now we are 2 years and counting, and we haven't gained anything. In fact, we have lost, if we're Russians, we have lost millions and millions of people, plus we have put all of our resources into the war. That means that the people that are at home, many of them are hungry. Many of them are even starving because the food and the resources, plus if you take out 6 million, 8 million people that a lot of them were working the fields before this, they were farmers and doing other kinds of agricultural things. They're not there now to help produce the food. So within Russia, for many people, they had lost the will to fight pretty early on in 1916. Now, added to that, terrible loss of life, terrible expense, with what seemed to be no gains, there is the underlying belief that the Tsar is incompetent. This guy you're looking at here, Tsar Nicholas II. He's incompetent. He doesn't know what he's doing. He got us into this war. Well, maybe his generals pushed him into it, suggested it. You know what's more likely, many people thought? It's his wife. His wife was controlling the Tsar. His wife was giving him bad advice. The wife was not liked, Alexandria. And increasingly she got less popular as time went on. You have to understand that Alexandria is not Russian. She's German. Wait a minute, we're fighting the Germans. And our Tsarina, that's what they would call her, I guess, the Tsar and the Tsarina, is a German. Plus, remember I told you that if you were a Tsar like this, and I don't know what year he got married, probably around 1905, something like that anyway, early 20th century, if you were a royalty like this guy, you can't just go find a lady by, using your smartphone and setting things up and saying, oh yeah, or going on TV, Who Wants to Marry a Tsar? You still have those shows on? Who Wants to Marry a Millionaire? If they up it to a billionaire, then I'll go on the program. Well, anyway. I think the title should be, Who Wouldn't Want to Marry a Millionaire, right? I guess that's the idea. They all want to marry the millionaire. The real question is, does the millionaire want to marry you? I don't really watch those shows, but that seems to be what the case is. All of them want to marry the guy. Does he want to marry? He's got to pick the one he wants to marry, right? That's pretty much what it is. It's like dating for rich guys on television. What could go wrong? Anyway, evidently a lot. So, remember, the Tsarina is German. So he got married to her. Why? Because, he can't marry anybody locally. Can't marry a Russian woman. Be very few that would be eligible because he's the Tsar. Right? He's going to be the Tsar. So he has to marry someone of high status, and this is typically how it was done. He married somebody from Germany, from England, from France, someplace like that. All right? And, but, of course, then since Germany is the enemy, the wife is German, already people don't trust her. What's that? You don't trust her? She doesn't trust her. Just looking at her, she doesn't trust her. Well, here's the other thing. Besides the fact she's German, and everybody thinks the Tsar is incompetent, and we're losing the war, this make a good, like a movie, right? TV thing. One of those Netflix things. She has a friend named Rasputin. Rasputin is a weird holy man. That's what I'm going to call him. A weird, what's that?
He said a weird holy man.
A weird holy man. No. Well, he is. He's some kind of he purports to be some kind of a prophet, some sort of a healer, some sort of a guy who can answer all the questions. He has a strange influence over the Tsarina. There are a lot of rumors about this influence. Again, I'm not going to go into them here. This is a family show. But it's that kind of stuff. You see, because the Tsar and the Tsarina have a child that's very sickly, and she believes that Rasputin is helping her child. That's one of the connections. Need him to keep her son alive. Need Rasputin to keep the son alive with his prayers and potions or whatever he's doing, right? Plus, it appears, the rumors are, there are orgies going on. Okay, can I say that word? I guess I can't. Forget I said that. I'll delete it. But there are things going on, and Rasputin has a lot of control over the Tsarina, is what most people believe, and I think he did. That way, sort of spiritually, physically, emotionally. And guess what? People believe that the Tsarina has a lot of control over the Tsar, because the Tsar is weak, and he's going to do what his wife says. And guess what? The wife's going to do what Rasputin says. And Rasputin, like I said, is a weird holy man. So, like I said, he's a sort of quasi-religious leader, monk, priest, prophet, I don't know how you want to describe him. But he's got a lot of negative press, let's put it that way. A lot of people do not like him. They do not trust him. He's got influence over her. They don't trust her. And she's got influence over the Tsar, and they think he's incompetent at best. So you want to know why we're losing? You want to know why we got problems in Russia? Goes right to the top. The Tsar, the Tsarina, and her advisor, Rasputin. There's an old saying, I believe it's an Ottoman saying, and this is it. The fish stinks from the head. You ever heard that saying? Probably not. Well, you just did. The fish stinks from the head. What does that mean? The troubles with things start with the leader. Okay? So you want to know where the troubles of Russia were? They started with the Tsar. If the Tsar stinks or incompetent, then all of Russia will get his smell, right? We'll all have to deal with it. We'll begin rotting from the head. Well, Rasputin certainly did interfere with government policies. He tried to interfere through the wife, through the Tsarina. And he's just he's kind of a spooky looking guy. I'm going to show you a picture here in a minute. Spooky, kind of spooky. How's that? Hey, it's Halloween tomorrow. And we got a spooky, maybe, no, you probably shouldn't. Maybe you could dress up like Rasputin. No, I didn't say that. Don't do that. Whatever, I advise against that. But he didn't wear a mask. We're all about fun, so Rasputin's not much fun, though. Well, anyway, let's move on. Hey, there'll be candy tomorrow, right? No? Oh, I have to bring it. I thought other people were supposed to give me the candy. No? No? Okay, it doesn't work that way. That's true. I haven't really received a gift in probably like 30 years. If I did receive a gift, I'd already paid for it.
Have you given any?
See what I'm saying? Have I given any? Oh, boy. You don't want a list. Yeah, I've given quite a few. Tsar Nicholas II. Oh, we're going to keep talking about him. Now, here's my buddy Rasputin. He got a beard. Wearing like a kind of a robe thing there. Right? Like I said, he looks a little, I think he looks a little spooky. Maybe even creepy.
Was he German?
He was not German. He was Slavic. I think he was Russian. He might have been. I'd have to look it up. We'd have to look him up. You know, when you prepare for your costume, you might want to look him up. No, do not dress like Rasputin. I said that facetiously. See? A little humor, and as you would say, very, very little humor. Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, he was definitely not German. Anyway, now here's the other thing about Rasputin. The guy was hard to kill. It's hard to kill the guy. You see these guys behind him? The royal family gets real nervous. That is, the czars, like brothers, cousins, and all that. Why? Because if the czar goes down, it's not going to be good for them either. So they know what all the rumors are, and even though the czar seems to be somewhat oblivious to what all Rasputin is up to, his relatives have kind of got it figured out. So they decide, for the good of Mother Russia and the Tsar and themselves, they needed to get rid of Rasputin. They tried several ways to get rid of the guy. Right? Tried poisoning him. They tried throwing him in the river. The guy keeps coming back. He's kind of like that Energizer bunny. You guys, they still have that commercial? They don't have that anymore. You know that commercial? That little bunny, he just keeps going. Everybody tries to stop him. He just keeps beating that drum. Well, Rasputin just keeps coming back. Finally, I think they ended up shooting him. Maybe then throwing him in the river. Anyway, they finally kill the guy. Rasputin is gone. But it took a long time to get rid of Rasputin. But he is executed in December of 1916. Now this was supposed to help the situation out for the Tsar. Sort of carried out by his family. How much he was involved with it is of some question. But still, it was perhaps too little too late. People did not really trust the Tsar, even without Rasputin being involved. This is going to lead people to strikes. There will be strikes in March of 1917. The people will decide to try to motivate the leaders of Russia to get out of the war and to focus on the problems of the people. So they just stopped working. We're not going to load the ships. We're not going to unload the ships. We're not going to show up in the factories. Everything comes to a halt. In the spring, well, early spring of 1917. What do the people want? Two main things. They want food and they want peace. Peace and bread becomes their chant, their motto, right? What do you want? Peace and bread. When do you want it? Now. Stuff like that. I don't know. I'm sure that wasn't one of their chants, but you get the idea. So they call for peace and bread. Eventually, then, the Tsar will be pushed out of office. And a new government will come to Russia. It's called the Provisional Government. And it begins March 15th in 1917. Everybody, I guess, had decided the Tsar should no longer lead. We're going to try a new kind of government. This is a more democratic government. Right? Provisional government. And of course, Russia had a legislative body, like we call Congress, somewhat equivalent to Congress, called the Duma. The Duma was the legislative body, and a provisional government is established by the legislative body, and the Tsar resigns. The Tsar resigns. So you might think, okay, now, middle of March, end of March, 1917, things are going to start looking up in Russia. People got what they want. They got a different government. The Tsar's out of the picture. Rasputin is dead. Springtime. Wonderful time for Russia. However, the provisional government does not really change much of the policies. Here is a picture of the provisional government, especially Kerensky. It's the guy standing here in the middle. Kerensky inspecting the troops, reviewing the troops. But there are no significant reforms or changes. Alexander Kerensky keeps Russia in World War I. He doesn't have them exit World War I. Of course, this is not what people wanted, or many people wanted. Alexander Kerensky. You see, spoiler alert, they don't kill him right away, right? He lives till 1970, so you know, he was up there. 89, was it? Something like that when he died. He dies of natural causes. Unlike what's going to happen to the Tsar, but that's a spoiler alert. Now, what's going to happen then? Well, they have councils in Russia. These are sort of like, I don't know, not really like a union, but something like that. In other words, a council of the workers, and say they're the workers of the factory, sort of had a workers' council. The soldiers had a council. Their word for council, by the way, is a Soviet. The workers and the soldiers' councils begin to protest. Why aren't we out of the war? Why haven't we received peace and ultimately bread, food? It's the war. So now, the anger which had been focused upon the Tsar, Rasputin, the Tsarina, and the Tsar, gets transferred in large measures to the provisional government. Why? Because the provisional government did not change the policies that some of these people wanted changed. And that was to pull Russia out of the war. And so we see a political movement coming. This movement is going to be called the Bolshevik Party. The Bolshevik Party, the word Bolshevik in Russian means majority. By the way, they were not the majority. But this lets us know that if you call yourself something long enough, then maybe people begin to think that's really true, right? So if I say I'm a part of the majority, we're the majority party, even though we're not the majority of people, well, everybody calls us the majority party, and pretty soon people start to think we are the majority. Well, at any rate, the Bolshevik Party, or the majority party, rises up. They're going to try to appeal to these Soviets, or these councils, and their ideology is going to be what we had talked about earlier, the teachings of Karl Marx. Marxism. Social Democrats. And Marxism. Okay? Now, what did Karl say? He said that the workers of the world should unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. That the workers are enslaved by those who own the factories, by those who are running things. And so they begin then to have these ideas of Marxism. And by the way, the ideas of Marx are out there. We'll certainly see them resurging or surging, how's that, post-World War I in many places. United States being one of them. Germany being another. Russia, of course, becomes the model of communist socialism, democratic socialism. All right, well, there had been this kind of talk before, and it had centered around this guy right here, Vladimir Ulyanov. Maybe you've not heard of Vladimir Ulyanov, but you might know him by his other name, Lenin. Lenin, by the way, had had a run-in with the Tsar long before, because he had been espousing this sort of Marxist ideology and getting rid of the Tsar and all that sort of stuff and overthrowing the government. You know, it doesn't make you too many friends with the government if you say you want to overthrow it. Just a little advice. So what happens to him? He is shipped off to prison. But he's still, even though he's shipped off to prison, people know he's there and it's still problematic. So eventually what they do is they deport him. So he was arrested for revolutionary ideas like overthrowing the government, setting up a Marxist state. They ship him off to a place that's a little bit like Florida. It's called Siberia. I guess it's like Florida in that the weather stays pretty much constant there. How's that? I've been trying to figure out the Florida thing, since I moved here. I've started to figure it out. People in Florida want the outside temperature to be as close as possible to their inside temperature. So if you're close to 98.6, then your body really doesn't have to, heat up at all. It's just right there. And if the humidity inside is 100%, and we got 95% humidity, and we got 95 degrees, we're within, 5 to 10 degrees of internal temperature. That's where we want it to be. So we drop below 90, and the humidity drops below 90. We start to go into crisis mode. We have to put on sweaters, wear parkas, gloves, hats, boots. I mean, if it's 75 degrees out, it is freezing. That's more than 20 degrees below your internal body temperature. How can you survive? Well, the question is, will you survive? You won't unless you take appropriate action of wearing a parka. Well, anyway. I'm working on that. I don't know if I have exact range there, but I do know if you're in the 70s, it's very frigid. It's like, 10 below zero somewhere else. But, I grew up where it was very cold. We had a lot of snow. Snow's that white stuff that falls from the sky. I saw some snow here in Florida. I went over to that shopping center, and they started shooting white stuff out around the fake Christmas tree. Turns out it was soap bubbles. You know what I'm talking about? Over at that place, I don't know, what do they call that place? That shopping center over there?
Lakeside Village.
Lakeside Village. I happen to be there, I don't hardly ever go there, and I'm walking around, and all of a sudden it's like, they turn on this music really loud, and they start shooting out stuff from guns. They got guns loaded up with this stuff, and it kind of looks a little bit like snow, but it's soap. I guess that's the only snow I'm going to see here. Well, that's all right, I guess. All right, well, what happens to our friend Vlad Ulyanov, Lenin? Well, he's shipped off to Siberia, but still he's creating problems for them because people know he's there. Sometimes he writes stuff down. Sometimes people are able to sneak it out, and that keeps people, hoping for his release and saying how terrible it is that he's being held in Siberia. So finally, the authorities of Russia decide they're going to deport him. They're going to kick him out of Russia. And they kick him out to Switzerland. Now, by the way, if you want to kick me out of the United States, okay, I'll take Switzerland. That doesn't sound too bad. You ever been to Switzerland? It's beautiful. Mountains. We don't have any mountains in Florida, but they got a lot of mountains there in Switzerland. Snow, there is snow. Beautiful green trees. That's not a bad place to be deported. I'd much rather be in Switzerland than Siberia, even though they both start with an S. Well, he is there for 17 years. He's there for a long time. Now, guess what? Remember I've told you my little saying. What's my little saying? It's not my saying, but a saying I often repeat in this class. My enemy's enemy is my friend. Yes, my enemy. So, the Germans do not like Lenin. But you know what they like even less? The Russians and their army. So they decide there's this trouble. They know that there's trouble in Russia with the Tsar, and there's trouble with the provisional government. And so you know what they do? They send Lenin back to Russia. They put him on a train car, right? He's on his own sealed train car, loaded up to a train. The train start moving to the Russian border. Then he gets picked up by a Russian train because, you got people working for him, and they take him right on into Petrograd, which is called Leningrad today. Well, anyway, it was Petrograd, became Leningrad.
So they kept kicking him out because he caused trouble, or because they didn't?
Well, the Russians kicked him out because he was a revolutionary. The Germans shipped him there to cause trouble for Russia. He wasn't causing them any much trouble. He's in Switzerland, not probably just hanging out, drinking Ovaltine, and listening to those big horns. You ever seen those big horns those guys in Switzerland have? It's like a big, I forgot what they call those things. He's probably listening to that, watching the sheep, the cows or whatever, But they know if they ship him back, he will create trouble for Russia, which is what they want. Because Lenin is the enemy of their enemy, so guess what? He's our friend, at least temporarily. Right? So they release him. They ship him there. They make sure he gets safe passage through all the war zones. And he ends up in Petrograd then in April of 1917, right after all this trouble. Remember, all this trouble in March, and the provisional government starting in March of 1917, and the Tsar has just resigned. They knew that Russia was vulnerable, they being the Germans, and that Lenin could capitalize. Ooh, Lenin capitalizing. That's pretty good. Lenin could capitalize on a situation. See, he doesn't like capitalism, but he's going to capitalize. Anyway, never mind. If you got to explain it, it's no good. So that's going to lead our friend Vlad back into Russia to cause trouble. And he's going to play the part. He had never been a worker himself. He didn't come from a family that was poor or anything. But he's going to start to wear a worker's cap. He wears a worker's cap, just like the guys in the factory wear. That's going to be his new sort of uniform. He's going to go out and speak like wearing the sort of clothes of the worker. He's going to talk about exactly what the people want to hear. We should have peace and land and bread. Notice he's added land in there. And he comes up with his April theses. His April theses for revolution. That reminds me, we didn't talk in here about Martin Luther, did we? That was past our time. But I saw a neat thing on what I call the interwebs. And it had a Halloween thing. It was showed like a front porch. And somebody had a pumpkin, and they had somehow drawn, I don't know how they did it, but they had a portrait of Martin Luther, the reformer, on the pumpkin, sitting on their porch. And guess what was on their door? 95 little Reese's cups. So it was Martin Luther with the 95 Reese's nailed to the door. Well, look it up, think about it. I think it's pretty good. I'm thinking about doing that, but I just don't know how I can make a pumpkin with Martin Luther's face on it.
You mean they carved it in the pumpkin? Or they
I don't know if it was carved. Maybe stenciled, maybe painted, I don't know. Anyway, the whole point is, you got Martin Luther, the door. And it wasn't 95 French fries.
There was only one.
I know. Just one French fry. All right, so he says, hey, we're going to get peace. We're going to get out of the war. We're going to have bread and food for everybody. We're going to have land. And guess what? The workers are going to control the means of production. He's kind of adding that part. That's the Marxist part, right? And he's going to say another thing you're going to like more. All power to the Soviets. All power to the committees. Power to the worker. Power to the people. Peace, bread, land. These are all things people wanted to hear. Now here's the thing. If you want to sort of do well, in politics, you have to sort of know what people want to hear. You know what I'm saying? You got to know what people want to hear. And then you've got to tell them what they want to hear. But you got to make it very simple, very clear. You don't have some elaborate thing, okay, here is my, 100-point plan for what we're going to do. No. You have 2 or 3 things you're saying. Say them very simply, and you repeat them often so that everybody knows, yeah, that guy is for peace, land, and bread. Am I for peace? Oh, yeah, sure. Do I want any bread? Sure, I'd love to have a hamburger. Do I want any land? Well, of course.
And some fries.
Maybe some fries, too. A little ketchup on there. I like the ketchup. Anyway. So, he comes in April of 1917. By October of 1917, remember the Tsar steps down in March. We get this provisional government in March. They don't change things. Now all of a sudden, magically, Lenin appears. Well, not magically. The Germans orchestrated it. And now he is preaching, teaching, proclaiming revolution. And that the power will go to the Soviets and the power will go to the people. So guess what? We end up having a revolution. This is still while World War I's going on. World War I is going on over in Europe, in France, Germany, and so forth. They are fighting. There are still some Russian troops there, by the way. So Lenin has to orchestrate a way to get Russia out of this war. Well, now the Germans have the Russians right where they want them. They're in upheaval. And I guess Lenin has Russia where he wants it, at least for now. He's going to take charge. He's going to take control. The Bolshevik revolution will begin. They will begin to take over the large cities of Russia, the factories of Russia, and the factories then will come under the control not of the sort of administrators of the factory, but will take control by the workers. And the takeover of Russia by the government goes full swing. So what does this mean? The factories no longer belong to whoever paid for and built the factory. The guy who invested millions and millions of rubles building the factory. Sorry, it's not your factory anymore. It's the people's factory. What does that really mean? It ends up meaning it's the government's factory, right? The banks are nationalized. What does that mean? That means whoever started the bank and whoever put their money in the bank. It's no longer your money. It belongs to the people, in quotes, which means it belongs to the government. So if you're a wealthy guy and you put your money in the bank, you can't go get it out. The government will not let you. They'll just say, that's no longer your money. That's the people's money. This happened not too long ago in Greece. Did you hear about this? I don't know. We've had a lot of trouble in Europe with the European Union. The European Union, have you heard about it? The EEU, European Economic Community, EEC. Anyway, part of the problem was basically in Europe, and it's still kind of going on, is that you've got a couple of rich countries, and they're basically subsidizing a bunch of poorer countries. Germany is one of the rich countries. France, one of the rich countries. England, one of the rich countries. Poor countries, got a lot. Spain, Portugal, Ireland, Greece. So what happens is that the European leaders start telling places like Greece, you've got to change your policy so you don't lose all this money, so you're not spending all this money. One of the things they had in Greece is you can retire when you're like, I think you're like 50 or something, right? You work till you're 50 and then you get like 3/4 of your income for the rest of your life. I might have those details a little bit wrong, but that's something like that, real crazy. Plus, their work week is only like 4 days a week. So you work 3 or 4 days a week, then you retire when you're like 50, and then you get paid pretty much your full salary till you're dead with all the health care and all that stuff. Well, that may sound like a neat deal, but who's going to pay for it all? So the government has to keep subsidizing it, right? So finally, the Germans said, I say the Germans, the European community, which pretty much is run by Germany, because they're bankrolling it, they said, look, Greece, you got to change this policy. You got to increase the retirement age. You got to decrease the retirement benefits. Of course, nobody in Greece wants that to happen. And they tell Greece, you got to come up with a payment to the European community because we have bankrolled you. We have given you lots of money, subsidies. You got to start making your annual payments back. They don't have the money to pay it back. So one of the things they did, I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago, is they just basically went into the banks. Anybody who had more than 10,000 euros in an account, they took all the rest of the money to pay this bill. I forgot the exact amount, but it was something like that. So if you had more than 10,000 euros, and a euro is just a little more than $1, any person that had more than 10,000 euros in a bank no longer had that money. That money was taken by the government and used to pay the European community. Well, anyway, just telling you this kind of stuff's still around. It can happen. So they nationalized the banks, which basically means rich people lost their money. The banks now belong to the government, or technically to the people, in quotes. What else happens? Private homes are seized. See, part of the problem of the people of Russia is they actually believe that there can be private property. That, that you have your stuff and I have my stuff and your stuff is not my stuff and my stuff's not your stuff and you get your own stuff and I'll get my own stuff. That doesn't fit with Marxism. A Marxist view, and by extension then a socialist view, is that all that stuff belongs to the people, which means it all goes to the government, and then the government decides what to do with it. So they took the homes. The wealthy had big homes, no more. They don't tear down the big homes, but what do? They turn the homes over and put many people in the homes. Usually in the fancy homes, by the way, they put the Communist Party leaders. That's a whole other story. And then what do they do with the guy who lived in the house, who thinks that's his house? We have to re-educate him. So we let him stay there in the house, but he's got to live like in the basement. And now he's going to be cleaning the toilets and taking out the garbage and doing all that kind of stuff to show him, to re-educate him into this idea that there is no private property. And so if he had money in the bank, that's gone. He's got a house, that's gone. Had a business, that's gone. Everything now belongs to the government. Well, some people didn't take that too well, as you might imagine. And if they made too much of a fuss, they just disappeared. In the middle of the night, they would be arrested, they would be taken away, probably to Siberia, and then you wouldn't see them again. Put them in a work camp, a re-education camp, we might call it, where they get to learn this sort of new way of thinking about private property. See, I was going to try, that's why really today I wanted to demonstrate that with a hamburger that was here in class. I was going to say, well, that's not really anybody's hamburger because there's no private property, so I could just... Well, I really wanted a hamburger. But, you know, we could all share. Anyway, that's what I was trying to do. It was just an object lesson. But I didn't actually do it, so it failed. I didn't actually eat the hamburger. Well, what other changes happened? Well, we have this guy, Urinsky. See him? Look at it. He's got a nice desk, doesn't he? I like his desk. He's got a little lamp. And see, here's his laptop. No, it's not a laptop. They didn't have laptops back then. That was a joke for those of you in YouTube land. But he is the head of the Cheka. The Cheka is the secret police. The secret police. By the way, I used to think, a long time ago, that the secret police meant that people didn't really know who they were. That was the secret. You know, the secret part was, like one of you, or maybe several of you, are in the secret police, and I just don't know you're in the secret police. Everything about the secret police is secret. I don't know where they are. I don't know, you know, who's in it and all that. I found out that wasn't the case. A long time ago, I traveled to communist Europe, back when communism was actually in rule. And I was in Czechoslovakia, which no longer exists now. There's Czech and Slovakia republics. But this is Czechoslovakia. It was under communist control, really run by the Russians, sort of as a satellite. And while we were there, I was kind of working with a mission thing. We were taking literature and stuff in. Maybe I shouldn't say that now. Oh, no, it's okay now. I can say it. But yeah, we took in literature. We were working with people in churches and camps and stuff like that. We had a youth camp in the mountains on the border of Poland. Anyway, and I remember as we were going around Czechoslovakia, everybody had these little dumpy cars. That's one thing I noticed. All the cars didn't look very good. The cars were called Skoda. Now I know in Europe they're trying to rebrand Skoda and make it, you know, a nicer car. They still make Skodas, but the Skoda was the Czechoslovakian car, which was really a knockoff of a Fiat, one of these little Fiats. Okay, they're called a Skoda. And basically, I asked some of those guys there about the cars because I was interested in it because they all looked the same. And they said, "Oh yeah, well they're almost all the same. They're not all exactly the same." So what is it? He goes, "Well, you can get it in beige or white." Okay. You can get it with 2 doors or 4 doors. That's it. Okay? But it was the same exact car. I think some of them had 2 doors, some had 4 doors. Some were beige, some were white. All the colors were pretty much the same. And so, so I kind of got used to that, seeing the same kind of cars everywhere, pretty much. And then one day when we were there, I see this really nice car. I thought, what kind of car is that? It looked like a big Mercedes. It was a big black sedan, shiny, looked really powerful. It didn't look like anything like these Skodas. And I thought, so I asked somebody, is that a Mercedes? What is that? And they told me the name. I forgot what it was. But that was a car that was made in Russia. And I said, well, look at that. How did that guy get that car? And then they said, the guy from Czechoslovakia said, well, that's a secret police. They always drive that kind of car. They have the best cars. So I'm thinking, now, wait a minute. If it's secret police, why are they going around in a car that nobody else has? Shouldn't they be driving around in one of those old Skodas like everybody else? No. They had a fancy, almost like a limo. They're driving around. They're the secret police. The secret part about the secret police is not that they have a secret police, not that this guy is from the secret police, but I think the secret is what they do to you when they take you away. The secret is, when are they coming to get you, and what do they do with you when they do? That's the secret part of the secret police. This guy was the head of the secret police. And I do think it's interesting, I put it up there, not that I wish him ill, but he was assassinated in 1918. Well, I guess you live by the sword, perhaps you die by the sword. Now, here are some of the things that change in Mother Russia. Women supposedly have equal rights. I mean, they have more equal rights than they had before. Also in Russia, remember that the church and the state had always been merged. In Orthodox churches of Eastern Europe, Russia, Greece, so forth, all the way back to the Byzantine Empire, the emperor was also the leader of the church. It's called Caesaropapism, if you want a fancy term for it. Caesar and Pope. The leader was both the Caesar and the Pope. I mean, the leader of the church and the leader of the people. But they're now going to separate that and separate the state from the church. Why? Because really, Marxism is atheistic. They believe religion is the opium of the masses. Remember, we talked about that earlier. So therefore, obviously, they don't want to promote religion. And the Russian Orthodox Church has to be diminished. Of course, many people follow it, but we don't want them having too much power. They want to diminish the power. And then, of course, they start this secret police, the Cheka, gets started. Now, remember, Lenin has shown up in April of 1917. The Tsar resigned at the end of March of 1917. This revolution took place in October of 1917. Now there's a big event that takes place in March of 1918. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. And what is that? That is important to remember because that is the treaty that takes Russia out of World War I. They quit, basically. They surrender to the Germans. The treaty then is their way of getting out of the war. Lenin had promised to get them out of the war. The Germans were not going to make it easy. So you know what the Germans wanted? A whole lot of land. Remember Lenin said land and peace and bread? Well, maybe what he meant by the land part is we're going to give a lot of it away. Because that's what he did anyway. He gave away a huge amount of Russian land. About a quarter of their European holdings he gives away to the Germans. This is what will embolden the Germans then in the spring of 1918 to begin to use the unrestricted submarine warfare because the Russians were out of the war. They didn't have a two-front war anymore. They were fighting in France against France and basically Great Britain. If they could weaken Great Britain, then France would surrender. They'd win the whole thing. But what's keeping France going? Well, the Germans were pretty much confident. What was keeping the British going was the fact that the United States was arming them and supplying them on these ships, especially passenger ships that were making their way across the Atlantic from places like New York. So Russia pulls out of the war in March of 1918, which leaves Germany now, even though it's been fighting everybody, and they are weak, they are weaker, but they can kind of see that they might actually win this thing if they can. Now, they knew the United States was going to join the war. They figured the United States would join the war. But the idea here is they have to defeat France and have Great Britain kind of give up before the U.S. join, and that's when they begin to use their submarines to attack ships coming from the United States to Great Britain, even though they knew that would draw the United States into the war. Well, they gave up about a fourth of the European territory of Russia and 60 million inhabitants. I'm talking like places like Poland, Estonia, Lithuania, and so on. Czechoslovakia, all those territories had been under the control of the Russians. They basically give it all up. They give it to the Germans, and the Germans say, okay, we're even. You're out of the war. We won't fight you anymore. You don't fight us. We don't fight you. We get all this land. Great. So this then gave the Germans some new resources to pull from those countries. Of course, those countries had already been involved in the war. And we're going to see another change is that the capital is now going to be moved to Moscow. From St. Petersburg or Petrograd, it will now be moved to Moscow, further inland, away from Europe, away from the water, to Moscow, where of course it still is today. Now you might think, okay, everything is over now. Lenin has won. Lenin has his country, he's got his capital, they're out of the war. Things can move on. But guess what? It was not over. Because now that the fighting has ended in World War I, the people inside of Russia who were not happy with Lenin and what he did, giving away all that land, taking over all the banks and factories and all the private property and business, a lot of people didn't like that. So Russia was divided between two factions that were usually called the Reds and the Whites. The Reds were the communists, the Bolsheviks. The Whites were basically everybody else. Anybody who didn't support the Bolshevik Revolution was lumped into this category known as the White Army. Well, it didn't end up being part of the problem, is that this White Army is not as unified as the Red Army because they have different factions. Some of the people in this so-called White Army wanted to bring back the Tsar, or a descendant of the Tsar. By the way, one of the things that happens to the Tsar and his family is that they are executed. So, isn't there some kind of Disney show about the princess? What's that one called? The Princess of Russia? Alexander, what's it called? I forgot it. Anyway, it's like, a story sort of got out that the princess escaped, she was still around and all that. She was dead. But anyway, yes, what's it called? Ah, there you go. So maybe she's still alive. Her and Elvis and Tupac, they're all working in a 7-Eleven in Dearborn, Michigan. What's that? Oh. Well, anyway, by the end of 1918, this war will end with the Red. That's just a very short thing, short summary of it. But this fighting goes on, and guess what? The United States sends troops to help. The Europeans sent troops to help the White. Because as things begin to end in World War I, things begin to heat up here. The commissar of the war here is Trotsky, this guy pictured here. Trotsky leads them. But the White forces are not unified, even though they had help from the Europeans and the United States. They end up losing. Trotsky then comes to the forefront, gets a lot of attention. That's not always the best for you, because eventually he is exiled himself. He's sent to Mexico, where he's assassinated later on in a hotel in Mexico. Yeah. So, after the Civil War then, Lenin will try to restructure Russia in what is called his New Economic Policy, or NEP, where he starts to bring back some limited capitalism. He starts to let some small businesses actually be privatized, because basically he found out that if he nationalized, or if he took over all the businesses, that all the businesses began to fail because there was no competition and there was no way to sort of motivate people to do things. You know, money can motivate people. So small businesses were allowed to privatize. The peasants were then taxed 10% of their harvest, which they did not like. The rest was sold on the open market. And they had some better economic prosperity after they began to reintroduce some ideas of capitalism. And so the Marxist revolution never went fully Marxist in Russia. All right, we'll end it there. Have a good day.